Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Applied Software Tech Group. You're invited to join our construction innovation and digital transformation adventure with a mission to model the future for this great industry. My guest today is Alfredo Carrato, venture capital advisor at CEMEX Ventures. Alfredo is a trained architect, BIM enthusiast, and college professor who scouts for breakthrough technologies and solutions in the decarbonization space for the construction industry. As a venture capital advisor, he oversees investment activities and strategic partnerships in CEMEX Ventures, putting a special focus on startups that effectively tackle the carbon footprint challenge of the built sector. Welcome to the show, Alfredo.
Thank you very much, Todd. Very happy to be here today.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. So, how did you get your start in the construction industry? What brought you into this space?
Well, as you mentioned, I'm an architect by training. So from my early student days, I really liked to see how things were um, built and how things moved from ideas to reality. So that's what brought me to, first of all, architecture and construction. And then later on, I decided to join CEMEX Ventures, who had really high ambitions on decarbonization, which is also one of my interests today.
Yeah. So, what sparked the interest in really taking a deeper dive into the decarbonization space?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, what we want to do is leave a better world than that we received from our parents and our predecessors. So, with that in mind, and considering that I am an architect by training, what I want to build is a better future for my children and my grandchildren, and that was at the end of the day what moved the needle in that direction and brought me to this new ecosystem around sustainability and how to make our world better than it is today.
Yeah. So, with your background in architecture, what kind of advantage or vantage point do you think that gives you looking at the sustainability issue in the built environment?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, architects know very little about many things. So I think that's one of the, I would say, advantages of being an architect in the current world. I mean, there are many topics and everything is very specific and so on. However, being an architect helps you have this broader picture and being able to identify long-term strategies instead of short or mid-term objectives. I think it's something that helps at the end of the day to wrap up all these endeavors and efforts that are indeed quite big and quite significant, not only for the build sector but for the entire humanity, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So maybe let's back up and kind of define some terms. What's a circular economy, and then how does Contech help to promote that?
Well, very good question, Todd. I mean, to start with, I would say that circular economy starts uh, with the conception that what used to be a sub-product or waste in the past now is understood as a co-product or something with the potential to be a value-added product by means of transforming it somehow and bringing it to the market again. So anything that can be turned into such value-added product coming from what used to be waste or residue can be understood as being part of this circular economy ecosystem that you were asking. And in this space, I mean, elements such as new building materials that come out of uh, industrial waste or new synthetic fuels that come out from CO2 or new chemicals that will help us reduce our reliance on water are just some examples of circular economy that will help us not only create new products that can be brought to the market, but also reduce the carbon footprint and the stress that we put on materials that otherwise would be subject to running out.
Yeah. So is it about really taking the material waste that is obviously prevalent in construction and then reusing and repurposing those
Absolutely.
materials for something else?
Yes, I mean, otherwise those materials would be landfill at the end of the
Hmm.
day, and giving that second chance to those materials is definitely what circular economy is all about.
Nice. What do you see as the maybe the biggest opportunity for the industry right now?
Well, I mean, connected to that previous idea, I think decarbonization as a whole is the biggest opportunity, but also the biggest challenge.
Hmm.
um, right now, for the construction industry as a whole, decarbonization is where the biggest gap, I would say, is, and where more improvements can be made to be able to reach, I mean, the same KPIs as other industries are handling. Of course, there are other fields where improvements can be made. I mean, we have productivity, digitization, supply chain, etc. However, I would say that decarbonization is both the challenge and the opportunity of our lifetime, and in that sense, where more improvements can be made for sure in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
Hmm. Nice. So when you think of the kind of the overarching sustainability umbrella, how does decarbonization fit in, and what should the role be in that sustainability environment?
Well, I mean, the value chain is very long, and many actors do take place in that value chain. However, at the end of the day, what we need to do is close the loop on carbon somehow. And for that, sometimes it is enough with one only stakeholder, and sometimes you need more, right? To be more specific and speaking maybe about our company's scope and objectives. CEMEX, as a building material supplier, um, belongs to one specific niche in the value chain, where the materials that we produce emit CO2 just because of the chemical reaction of them, and we need additional partnerships or additional works to be done to be able to capture that CO2 and give that second chance to the CO2 that has been emitted, right? So in that sense, being able to partner with companies that can capture the CO2 or can transform that CO2 into new value add products is something that is needed across the entire value chain to be able to, at the end of the day, and as I was mentioning previously, close the loop on carbon and avoid emissions to the atmosphere, which ultimately will make our planet warm more than what we should do.
Hmm. Yeah. So how do you go about sharing the benefits of all this with someone that has a narrow specialty? Uh, that's the first part, and then the second part: how do we start uh, communicating it out to our colleagues and leadership to gain more buy-in?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to put it so simple, but um, what I would say is that, first of all, the value chain is very complex. That's a fact. And there are many actors involved in this ecosystem. So there are some emitters, heavy emitters, and there are some entities that can obviously provide the technological advances that are needed to be able to capture that CO2 and do something about it. And then there's also the funding gap covered by public and private entities, and that
Hmm.
will be able to make this process faster or slower depending on how much money or capital is poured into this initiative, right? So at the end of the day, you have all those bits and pieces that need to come together at some point. Obviously, capital is the hardest glue to make things stick together and work well. But I think that through the different advances that have occurred lately, both on the technological front, but also on the financial side of things, I think that we are facing a period where all these advancements will take place and will speed up, so that companies, and not only companies, but also governments and countries as a whole, will be able to hit the milestone that they've set for 2025, 2030, and beyond. Speaking about decarbonization and how we want to reduce our carbon footprint, becoming even carbon neutral or net zero by 2050 or beyond.
What do you think is the catalyst for really helping to speed up the momentum behind this effort?
Well, probably short answer would be capital, but capital is not the only thing. At the end of the day, it's all about connecting the dots, and getting the right people involved in the right discussions.
Mhm.
As mentioned before, you have the technology, you have the incumbents, you have um, the funding piece, that at the end of the day is going to speed up the process, but you need all of those pieces to work in a cohesive way, so that everything is lined up when it needs to be lined up, and everything happens when it needs to happen. Right now, there are many inefficiencies around the process where not everybody is on the same page, and where things happen somehow a disordered manner. But through collaboration, which I believe is a key word to all of this, we need to all together promote this new green economy and work in favor of that. It doesn't mean that we need to sacrifice other objectives, because profitability is sometimes a word that tries to prevail on top of uh, other objectives, but I think that they are not incompatible one with the other. We just need to find new ways of thinking about new problems,
Mhm.
and I would say it's a matter of at some point thinking out of the box and promoting new solutions for new problems.
Yeah. So one of the big trends that's coming into construction is around big data and being able to leverage just so much information and data points from all these different softwares that are coming in. How is the move on big data really making an impact on the sustainability effort as well?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, and this may sound obvious, but we cannot improve what we cannot measure, right? So that's
Mhm.
the entry point for big data and the likes. But with that in mind, I think that the progress that data is doing or needs to do to be able to be useful at the end of the day is um, bringing that data or converting that data into real information that can be interpreted, and then
Mhm.
through time we would convert that information to real knowledge. And when we get to that knowledge, we would be able to make the right decisions around the same or different problems that we are facing, and only through time we would maybe even bring that knowledge to wisdom, which is the ultimate level that we want to reach. And through the combination of big data plus information plus knowledge, would be able to excel in this new form of evaluating not only problems that we have, but also improving the current performance of how we do things.
Yeah. So to zero in a bit more, I totally agree that you have to know what you're measuring. So what would be kind of benchmarks that people should take into consideration when thinking about the green construction economy? What's the goal? What should they be measuring to uh, and looking for that big data to come along and give them the information and the insights needed?
Well, I mean, the ultimate goal would be to measure the carbon footprint, right? That's the big word behind everything. However, to be able to analyze that, sometimes you need to look into KPIs that are not so tangible at first sight. Um,
Hmm.
some of them, meaning like the more obvious ones, can be related to the carbon footprint of certain materials that are being employed in the building, what techniques are being used for sunlight or for location of the building? How are you handling HVAC stuff around? How are you treating water? So on and so forth, right? So those are the different like variables that I would say are included in the design of a building. However, the lifetime of a building does not end when the building is built, but rather when you
Mhm.
operate it for 50 plus years, right? So all what's
Right.
related to the operation and maintenance of a building has a huge impact on the ultimate carbon footprint of such building. And there are many ways to measure the impact of what you do with that building that are relevant to be able to reach to that final KPI that you're looking for, right? So it's a bit more complex than than one would expect, but there are like two main milestones: one during the design and the construction of the building, and one when you operate it. Both are equally relevant. The slight difference is that when you're designing and building the asset, you have a more impactful way of making changes to that design or to that construction. While as when you try to make changes to a building that's already built, first of all, it will cost you much, and the impact that you will be able to make on such building would be much less.
Sure. Yeah. Are there certain kind of leading measurements that you can see along the way to make course adjustments in the design, and then again in the operation side of it, instead of like I'm trying to think through how do you, as you're going along the project, how do you see, oh, maybe we're a little off course here, we need to kind of course correct and get back on to really hit our goals and objectives, and doing that, those small course corrections along the way, instead of looking back and going, oh, we need to make a really big course correction because we didn't have eyes on it. I don't really have a formulated question for that, but does that make sense? Or are there the
Yeah,
ways that you can kind of make small adjustments along the way?
you can, and for such a purpose, I mean, one of the biggest advancements in the design phase of built assets has been building information modeling, or BIM.
Uh,
Um,
sure.
BIM allows you to make hundreds, if not thousands, of designs in a very short amount of time, and be able to analyze the performance of such designs in very early stages of the project, right? So through parametrics and algorithms and so on, you can evaluate how sunlight will impact the building in summertime and wintertime. How much would you need to supplement the excess or lack of heat associated to sunlight with HVAC or other means? What can you say about I don't know, water temperature coming through? If you can go geothermal or you cannot. So these decisions that are taken earlier in the decision making process have a huge impact on the building later on downstream, and they're done in a very, so to say, cheap way, because you can do
Mm-hmm.
many designs when there aren't still many decisions being made that affect the budget of the project, right? So that's one thing that you can do very early on. And as the project progresses, as I was commenting before, the possibility to impact on the performance of the project is reduced, because the project is being more and more complete as you progress, and the cost also of doing those adjustments, as you were mentioning, Todd, are also less impactful, right? So it's a matter of, I would say, taking the right decisions at the same time, which translates to the earlier the better.
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
be
Which
honest.
brings us back to the collaboration piece, that if you get those people in the room on the early side, the right people in the room at the right time, uh, you're able to get a lot more accomplished as well.
Correct. Yeah.
Excuse me 1 minute. We have my kids are crashing. I'll be right back. Sorry.
No worries.
I'm back. Sorry about that. They haven't crashed my uh recording in a while.
It's
uh,
okay.
I saw them. I have French doors, and so I saw them looking through. If I could just keep focused, then usually they don't come in unless I like glance over, but
It's all
didn't
right.
work this
I
time.
have a 1 year old, so yeah, it's okay.
Nice, nice. uh, okay, so Alfredo, how do we really efficiently uh, capture, store, and then reuse the carbon that is happening on job sites?
Hmm. Great question. I mean, and now what we need to be aware of is that we're jumping from the digital side of things to the physical side of things again. Um,
Uh-huh.
Going physical, obviously, many things that we have around us emit CO2. Job sites do emit CO2 from many sources, and buildings do emit at the end of the day CO2. So what do we do, or what can we do about it? There are many things, but ultimately, what we need to do is capture that CO2 and avoid it being released to the atmosphere, because that will warm our planet, and that's something that we don't want. So um, I would go to the origin of the problem, which is those industries where carbon is emitted most intensively. There are, like many industries, we have the oil and gas, we have the steel, we have the power industry, we have cement, and all of those industries add up to a large chunk of what's being emitted today to the atmosphere. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and going back to your question, what can we do about it? First of all, in those facilities where carbon is being emitted, first thing we need to do is capture it, right? But that does not solve the problem. As we were commenting before, we need to connect the dots, and we need to get the right people at the right time in this conversation. So once CO2 is being captured from those sources, we need to find a way to close the loop on it. And there are many ways. We can either utilize it, as we were also discussing when we were talking about circular economy, or we can also store it underground, where it has been proved that CO2 can stay trapped for thousands of years, if not millions, and that would be another alternative, right? So we need to capture CO2, bottom line, transport it somewhere where it can be either transformed to value-added products, or else stored underground. That would be the ways that we know to date that are useful to close the loop on carbon and avoid it being emitted to the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as the construction project is happening, how do you go about really practically capturing the carbon? What does that process look like?
So, I mean, first of all, concrete as a material, and this is something that maybe not everybody knows, has the ability to capture CO2 over time. By being exposed to the atmosphere, it can capture and trap CO2 permanently,
Mm.
but it takes a long time, right? So we need
Yeah.
other measures that are able to do that same thing in a shorter amount of time. And that is why we need to go upstream to those building materials and how they are produced, so that when those materials are brought to site, they're already decarbonized, or as decarbonized as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest chunk of CO2 emissions that can be avoided. However, there are others in terms of how you actually bring things to site through a sustainable supply chain. There are also different construction methods that can be more or less impactful on CO2 footprint, and then how you operate a building at the end of the day over a 50-year time period can also help reduce carbon footprint and bring a building to either net zero, carbon neutral, and the likes. There are several certifications right now in the market that are able to um, um, award prices or credits to certain buildings that have been proved to be either carbon neutral, net zero, or with a certain footprint that is sustainable enough to be able to be considered like best in class in several aspects.
Hmm. That's really interesting. So, is it kind of going back up more to the manufacturing of the materials, capturing it there instead of, once it gets to the job site, it's almost too late at that point.
Yeah,
Is
well,
that
I mean,
fair?
sort of. It's I would say that the problem gets too atomized when you are speaking of individual buildings. While as if you go
Uh-huh.
to the big cement factory where cement is being produced for, I don't know, several hundred buildings, you're tackling the
Yeah.
problem upstream, which is more efficient, right? So uh,
Yeah.
the most effective way to tackle this, as discussed, is going as upstream as possible. And with that, obviously, there are things that you need to do further downstream and that you can do. But as we were discussing when speaking about the design phase of a construction, the actual manufacturing of the building materials that are going to be put on site later on, um, it works better when you tackle the problem upstream than when you happen to tackle it downstream, further down the road.
Yeah. No, I think that makes total sense. In my head, coming into this conversation, I was thinking of it as, one-off job uh, sites, and like, oh, wow, that's going to be really complicated and really slow. But going back up to the, going upstream and tackling the problem more collectively and holistically as an industry, that makes total sense. It's much more efficient for sure, because you're impacting so many more job sites by doing it that way, and it's easier to control as well. We talk a lot about prefab and modular construction around here, and it's really kind of taking the same principle and just moving that onto the sustainability side of things.
For sure, yeah, and those two examples that you were giving are yes, spot on. For instance, modularized construction or industrialized construction is bringing um, everything around the job site to a controlled environment at the end of the day,
Hmm.
where you can measure things and where you can improve them much more efficiently than downstream. And at a job site where things everybody knows, it's a bit messy. Let's
Right.
put it that way.
Gets complicated fast there.
Yeah.
So what do you see as the next step in the industrialization of sustainability?
Well, I mean, I think that the whole value chain around industrialized construction needs to be connected again. I think it is a matter of collaboration. The value chain is completely different to that of traditional construction. The stakeholders have different roles, and the conversation is completely different, right? We were speaking about design phase as being important in
Hmm.
like current asset construction. In industrialized construction, it's even more important. So what today is recommended, tomorrow with industrialized construction is mandatory. We need to take decisions way before the actual asset is built, because once the design is ready, execution is going to be automated or highly automated, and there are no errors linked to that unless you make those errors during the design phase. So you need to be much more conscious about the design of the building, about the design of the asset, about how that is going to be built, how that is going to be brought to site, when is it going to be brought to site, what's the order in like of how the asset is built, because
Hmm.
those decisions at the end of the day make the difference. And as mentioned before, what used to be recommended now needs to be mandatory, because if not, you're gonna fail when you try to put together two bearing walls that are made by a computer that has no error, and that error can only be attributed to a human mistake, right? So you need to be really conscious of that, and try to make all those changes, adjustments, or whatever beforehand if you don't want to risk or put at risk the execution of built assets.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So, what does innovation mean to you then?
Well, I mean, as a broad word, you mean, or?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean,
Well, so we.
I would say innovation as a whole, or I mean, at least connected to the built environment, is um, the I mean the place where all the people that are connected or that should be connected in this huge value chain um, should bring all their best efforts and all their best intentions to be able to promote a sector that is lagging and lacking of productivity, that is lacking of sustainable KPIs compared to other sectors, and then at the end of the day, and as we were discussing also previously, has the biggest gap to close, right? So
Mhm,
I think that innovation in the built environment is something that can add a lot of value to both uh, private companies, but also the public sector as a whole and the infrastructure of a city. However, there is a lot to be done because we're just starting, we're just taking our first baby steps, and there's still a big gap to close in that sense. I think that the game plan is there. I think that there are many players trying to make a difference and uh, invest not only capital but also way of doing things to improve the sector.
mhm,
However, this isn't a problem that can be solved by only one stakeholder. We need to be coordinated when we deliver these kind of projects, these kind of initiatives, and that again would summarize everything that we have been discussing today. Without proper coordination, we won't be able to move as fast as we want to move and reach the targets that we have for the next few years in terms of
mhm.
sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how do people find out more information on what you're doing and connect with you?
Well, I am part of CEMEX Ventures, which is the open innovation platform and corporate venture arm of CEMEX Ventures. So happy to connect with anybody who's interested in the same topics that I am. You can reach me at alfredo.carrato at cemexventures.com or through our website, cemexventures.com, anytime. Happy to discuss more with more people about these interesting topics. And very glad that we're using this bridging the gap window to be able to amplify this message and reach out to more people.
Yeah. So, final question for you, Alfredo. If I could give you all power and you could snap your fingers and innovate one aspect of the construction industry, what would you choose to innovate?
Well, it's a very good question, but um, obviously, target is to be carbon neutral, net zero, or equivalent. The sooner the better. So um, if we could just be less self-centered, less how to put it, less introvert, and be able to open up books, connect with more stakeholders, and be able to speed up this decarbonization process that we have just started, it will be
Mhm,
great. I think that that's the real key to not only decarbonization but to everything in business and industry, right? So I would say that to summarize, if we could speed up this decarbonization roadmap through real connections between private and public entities, uh, technology suppliers, big and bold partnerships, etc., it would be great.
mhm. Uh, That's an awesome answer. Uh, Love that. Yeah, it's a great way to end the conversation as well too. Alfredo, thanks so much for taking the time and coming on to the show and talking about this important topic. It was really fascinating. Thanks so
My
much.
my pleasure, Todd. Yeah, it was great.